like this are great events to get the press involved in, to hear the other side of the story, to hear the facts. We've seen a lot of the other groups around that have information that can be used, fact sheets that are valuable in getting the message out. Let the science speak for itself. We heard about the Bluegrass Pipeline earlier. And what they try to do is get misinformation out, facts that are not, well, information that's not factual. And it's always good to have an opinion, and everybody's entitled to an opinion, but not everybody's entitled to their own facts. This was an image from the Bluegrass Pipeline opponents, the Stop the Pipeline. It says 1/2 truth plus 1/2 truth equals a lie, referring to the information that was out there from the industry side. But if you look through their website, and an example there is at the bottom of half-truths that were being posted on their website, you see that their tactic is misinformation. And I'm sure most of you have heard of the frack-free foothills, the community effort to keep the Appalachian foothills safe from fracking. And when you scroll through that website, you see, again, misinformation, misconceptions, and just information that's not correct. What do we do to counter that? Well, here was a good start. You see Jim Sheff, who's one of the, I think the executive director of Kentucky Heartwood, who was on a program recently on WEKU. I don't think I have to introduce the other two guys there. It was an excellent program if any of you had the opportunity to listen to it. And I believe it's still on the WEKU website on their Eastern Standard program. Bill and Brandon did a great job of countering the misinformation that was coming out. The Appalachian Research Initiative for Environmental Science, called ARIES, was started at Virginia Tech primarily to counter a lot of the misinformation and a lot of the misapplied science coming out on mining. And it is also being expanded now to cover energy production in Appalachia, and I think they're even planning to change the name to take it to a nationwide initiative to look at energy production. A couple of years ago, at the conference that was held in Charleston, West Virginia, Dr. Lynn Peters was the keynote speaker. Dr. Peters, of course, is the Secretary of Natural Resources, or Energy and Environment Cabinet here in Kentucky. And just as he started to speak, two young guys who had snuck in, sat down right in the front, handcuffed themselves together through a tube, and started chanting, "Coal kills, science lies." And the groups that they represent don't want to hear science that may disagree with what they believe and what they want everybody else to believe. They were carted out on a hotel luggage cart, and took a few minutes to get that done and get back to the program about the real science that's going on. And science that didn't always agree with what industry would like to see, but it was telling the facts. If there are problems, industry needs to address those problems. There are many groups out there. We've probably heard about the environmentally friendly drilling program that has a lot of facts and works with industry to provide that unbiased science and develop the solution to address those issues. We've heard about the headlines about fracking can trigger earthquakes. And KGS, I think you may have read about in the last few days, is starting their network of seismographs across the state to address that issue and get some background data so that we can address those problems. KGS has been a great partner, I think, with the industry. Keystone Pipeline. But we're going to transport oil in this country. Is it going to be by pipeline, or is it going to be by oil trains? And we've seen some of the disasters that have happened there. So which is better? It's going to be a political solution, unfortunately. Fracking bans. You've heard about those across the country. Denton, Texas passed a fracking ban. even though there were a couple of hundred wells within the city limits that had already been drilled and fracked. This one right beside North Texas football field. And I believe, if I heard correctly, the legislature in Texas has passed legislation to ban local bans on fracking. We heard about New York Governor Cuomo banning fracking, even though the state's own reports showed that there were no long-term effects of fracking. And then we had the EPA study that came out recently, someone was discussing earlier, that shows there's no evidence of widespread problems in the groundwater. I think it was Brian at lunch said the next tactic is to look at the air issues, which we need to be ready to address. And a real catch-22 for environmental groups is the clean power plan depends on natural gas, which depends upon hydraulic fracturing. Ohio voters delivered mixed results on fracking bans. Athens, Ohio was the only one that actually passed one. And then interestingly, some of you may have caught this. Sally Jewell, the new Secretary of the Department of Interior, had this quote about fracking bans. And she's now being discredited by many of the environmental groups for having had the audacity to make that statement. DOE is beginning to provide funding for field laboratories to establish some baselines. Hopefully that will be a good thing to get some real science out there. This was interesting. Last month I was out in Colorado, and there was a local controversy over a court ruling of an existing coal mine employing several hundred miners at Colorado. And a group called the Wild Earth Guardians had sued, saying that the government had not done adequate study to evaluate the greenhouse gas emissions. And the judge remanded it back and said either address those issues or suspend the permit. And what was interesting about it is there was pushback from the local community, Craig, Colorado. People started looking at the backing for this group, the Wild Earth Guardians. And they had a section that talked about businesses that supported their movement, Business for Guardians. Well, there were over 450 of those businesses that said they'd never heard of the Wild Earth Guardians. And more significant was a couple of the largest breweries in Colorado. The local stores and bars started banning and boycotting those beers. They came in and addressed the community in a community meeting saying, we do not support this group. We want to sell beer to coal miners, not environmentalists. So I think it was a good example of what can be done if we dig deep and out some of the groups and out some of the supporters of these groups to give some pushback. Something that our group, SME, has done that we feel has started moving the dial on public perception. There used to be a mining merit badge back in the early 1900s. In fact, it was one of the original 10 merit badges for Boy Scouts, and it was suspended at some point for some reason. We went through a 10-year effort, spending tens of thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that mining merit badge reestablished. It happened last year, and in 1 year alone, we had over 3,500 merit badges. There's a geology badge and there's an energy badge. And I think that's something that groups like KOGA could do to help get more kids interested in the earth sciences and give them a real picture of what's going on in energy development. And really that triumvirate of mining, energy, and geology is a great package to encourage kids to go after in the Scouts. And now we're at SME, we're trying to work on the Girl Scouts, we're going to work on 4-H, and actually FFA. So I borrowed this from the Sierra Club. And I think it's a good point for all of us to think about. What does your activism mean to you? I think we can all be active. And the bottom line is, it's really going to take a grassroots effort. Brian at lunch said he didn't like that bumper sticker about being global and acting locally. But I think we have to look at it from a local perspective and be willing to take on some of these issues, each of us every day. I always like to use this cartoon, and that's what I think some groups would like to see in our world. So with that, my goal is to make sure that our industries don't have their head in the sand and address these issues head on. So thank you, Andrew, for the chance. Be glad to answer any questions.
Jason.
Hey, Jason.
Thanks for that. A lot of the hardcore environmental movement seems to be rooted in a very, deep anti-capitalist mindset philosophy. But much of the environmental politics of today are aimed at moving and manipulating markets. If you follow what Wall Street does and what the investment community does, they kind of piggyback off Al Gore, carbon futures, and trying to create this new green economy. At what point do you think the hardcore environmentalists are going to realize that they're being used to some extent as shills for Wall Street investors?
Interesting point, and I'm not sure I have an answer for that. Being on some panels before and talking about coal and mining and alternatives, and my comeback is usually that the mining industry loves alternative energy, because do you realize how much mining it takes to build a windmill or to build a solar panel? Problem is, where is the mining being done to build that solar panel? Primarily China. So we're transferring whatever impacts are there. It'd be much more environmentally responsible to mine those materials here in our country, where we have decent and adequate environmental controls, to generate our own solar panels. So I have no problem with alternative energies, but we have to have a mix. And we're going to be mining coal, we're going to be using oil and natural gas for decades, if not centuries to come. How do we change those mindsets? Well, you're never going to change some people's minds. And what I'm trying to encourage people to do is talk to those people that are impressionable, who read the headlines in the paper and then become convinced one way or the other that that is the situation out in the world. I'm not sure you're ever going to affect those groups you were referring to. Not sure if that addressed everything you were asking there, but...
That's helpful, but not only do they, as an anti-capitalist, but I think at their core, many of them believe that all corporations are evil. So how do you convince those people that they're well-intentioned, good people out there trying to produce low-cost energy for poor people? Another hurdle.
Yeah, I think maybe it was Brian at lunch again who talked about energy poverty in the world, and that's a big issue. Trying to raise the standard of living, and with what we're seeing, it's become a moral issue now with the encyclical that's out there. Who's it going to impact the most? It's going to hit the poor, the elderly, the increasing cost. And if we can expand and make the energy generally available to society, worldwide society, it's going to raise standard of living. Nobody talks about the health benefits of energy utilization. They talk about the small amount of health impacts from localized activities. So again, you're not going to change some people's opinion, but what we need to do is change the opinions of some of the people in that mushy middle, we call it. So.
Any other questions?
Again, thank you.
All right, thanks, Steve.